So, hello. We are here with another episode of New World BrassCast, and I am super excited because we have one of my past teachers today. Yay!
Yay.
We have Dr. Stephen Arthur Allen here, and he's one of those people who you can talk to about pretty much anything musical, and just he just is a wealth of information. So, thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Wealth of information. We'll see.
I remember being on I remember being over there for lessons, and you could pull out some detail of one composer's piece and be like, well, he wrote this around this time, and this motive is found in this other piece, and he must have been writing these two things at the same time, and look how the interplay. And I just sit there, just try to soak it in.
I figured out quite a long time that if you have to be a nerd, you might as well make your living doing it.
Good philosophy. Yeah.
That is a good philosophy. Are you retired, Stephen? Or are you still working?
No, I may look like I am, but no, I am still gainfully employed, because unlike France, you can't retire at either 62 or 64 in this country, right?
Yeah, I guess not. You got way many more working years in you.
Oh dear, what a laugh. Tony, what was that?
So what are you currently doing now?
So I'm still professoring at Ryder, and I'm really enjoying it. Actually, I love the teaching. As Amy said, I guess it's one of my gifts. So it's really wonderful to be able to exercise it, either online or in the classroom. So I'm still very much enjoying that. COVID changed everything in that it slowed life right down, and I realized that I'm more of an introvert than I ever knew. I'm quite happy at home with books and my wife and telly and a good piece of exercise every morning. Nice walk around the block, 7,000 steps, get that in. You don't even have to think about exercise for the rest of the day,
Yeah.
Except lifting your mug of coffee. I mean, lose a couple of micro ounces a day doing that. But other than that, no, it's good. It's all good.
So little known fact. We're obviously going to focus on Steve's brass band stuff, but Steve teaches do you still teach the classes on pop history and stuff?
I do.
Yeah, he's an expert on like Radiohead, and what else? What other classes do you teach?
Bruce Springsteen. Pop rock history. Yeah. It's really interesting because I had almost zero interest in any of that before I moved to the States. But moving to the States made me suddenly realize there was this incredible legacy in England of pop and rock acts. And so all of a sudden, it was like being a classical nerd who'd made his living being a classical nerd. I figured, well, let's make my living being a popular music nerd. So it became a sort of like an undiscovered country. And I'm still really enjoying it, actually, discovering all kinds of groups and singers and bands. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I was kind of jealous when you were teaching. I think it was the movie music. It was like philosophy and like film music.
Yeah, Stanley Kubrick. Yeah, the Stanley Kubrick class. Yeah. That's a really great. Somebody should put a brass band program together of Stanley Kubrick theme music from his different movies. That'd be a great one. Just to sort of interconnect it with the main channel of discussion here,
Wow, yeah, for sure. That's Clockwork Orange. That was
Yeah.
that a Kubrick movie? Yeah.
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah. What was the Vietnam one?
Oh yeah, a Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal. Yeah. Boy,
And
that would
Barry
be
Lyndon as well. Barry Lyndon, which is
Yeah.
is probably his least well-known film. It's a stupendous movie.
Yeah, that would be an odd concert.
He was one of the first to use classical music. He upset Hollywood big time by using classical music in 2001 and thereafter. And because that means that a lot of the music in his films is very well known by a lot of people. So, it could make quite a good concert.
Yeah. Well, he definitely reworked or put a new meaning to the Also Sprach Zarathustra opening fanfare.
He did. Absolutely, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I often tell my students actually, let's have a listen to the rest of it, because there's a whole 25 minutes
40
more
more
that
minutes
comes
of it. Yeah.
What was there was a piece that we played at Rutgers before the brass band was discontinued, and now it's back. But that it sounded like it was movie music, and I remember you talking about it. It was Thea Musgrave.
Oh, the Variations for Brass Band, yeah.
I thought that was a fantastic piece. If people who are listening, like, hunt down this piece, because it's like super creepy, cool, wacky stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
What piece is it?
It's called Variations for Brass Band by Thea Musgrave.
It sounds like it's like a horror movie soundtrack.
Yeah. One of the first real modernist pieces for brass band in many ways. One of the groundbreakers. But yeah, it's a great piece. There's a famous story, just for those that are interested in brass band history. In 1967, Jeffrey Brand was called in to conduct Black Dyke Mills in the radio broadcast. I don't know whether the previous conductor had left or some such, but anyway, that was on the program, along with William Allwyn's overture and another piece. And he conducted the band, and they really liked him. They invited him to be their conductor, and they ended up winning the Nationals that year on Journey into Freedom. And then there was a whole tremendous period of great success with him conducting. So for a lot of people that know about Jeffrey Brandy's background, they might be surprised to know that piece was actually one of the deal breakers that got him to conduct Black Dyke back in the 60s.
Huh,
yeah, I'm full of this kind of garbage.
See what I'm talking about? This is what my lessons were like.
Well, speaking about the British brass band history, could you talk to us about how your start was in brass bands?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the real brief version. I was very badly, chronically asthmatic, asthma, the chest breathing illness in the 60s. And there were very few cures even back then. So they told me to blow something. So the only thing that was left in the music cupboard was a euphonium. So I picked it up, played a scale, which was really important for me because I just needed to have some success within the first 10 seconds, like most kids of that age, right? And I took that up. I was pretty good at it, and ended up joining one of the local adult brass bands in Oxted, Surrey, band that's got history that goes back a long, long way. And there were some terrific players in that band. Linda Nicholson, actually, one of the great cornet players with the National Youth Brass Band, went on to do a lot of conducting, played with Black Dyke herself as principal cornet. I think the first woman, maybe even cornet player in that band, let alone principal cornet. That was during the James Watson era. And her sister Brenda, and just that was a really great time. And then I went to one of the very few colleges in the country that had a brass band course, and ended up going to the School of Music because they wanted a baritone player. They were short of a baritone player, and they were a very good band. They came third to Black Dyke in 1979 from draw number 1.
Oh, whoa!
Yeah. I think
nice.
Corey was second. I think Black Dyke won, Corey second, and then Birmingham School of Music brass band. It was a pretty hot group. There were some great players in that band: Andy Colshaw, Andy Forbert, lots of people that went on to great brass careers. And my writing sort of started around that time too, which is what I mainly do now. Actually, that since COVID, especially, that's become the main sort of pillar of my working life. So I owe a lot to brass bands, and I've always loved them. It's always been socially as much as anything else. I mean, I could tell you some stories from those years that make your hair fall out. I mean, there was some real, as everywhere, there's some real characters in the brass band world, So that's my thumbnail version.
Speaking of writing, I have your publication on Resurgam over on my desk in the corner over there. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it's fantastic work.
Oh, the Eric Ball one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was invited. It's a funny story, this. I wrote an article on Benjamin Britten. I think it was his violin concerto for the Musical Times, which is a notoriously difficult journal. It's about 150 years old. It's very venerable, and it's almost impossible to get. They have multiple readers, approve you before you can get published. And the editor actually contacted me afterwards and said, "I want you to do a series on brass band music." I thought that was a yanking my chain. I thought, oh yeah, someone's having a real laugh here, because I mean that kind of thing just doesn't normally happen. So sure enough, I went on to produce a number of articles for the Musical Times, Holst, Elgar, Vaughan Williams, mainly golden era composers. And then I wanted to bring in a brass band composer, one of the insiders, as it were, because a lot of the readers of that journal would recognize Holst and Vaughan Williams, but they wouldn't recognize Eric Ball. So I did those other articles first to give us a lead in. And so Eric's Resurgam, yeah, that was a wonderful thing to be able to write about. And it ended up being, I think it was either 2 or 3 parts in the end.
It's 3. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It ended up being like a multi-part thing, which was great because it enabled me to dabble in a lot of Eric's other music as well, But yeah, one of the neat little things that I dug up about that was that during the Blitz, during the Second World War, Eric was in London and he'd gone to St. Paul's Cathedral, and he saw the souls of the righteous are in the hands of God written somewhere. I think it might even have been on a gravestone outside the cathedral there. And that kind of lodged in his brain. It's not in the Bible, interestingly enough. It's in the Apocrypha, which is interesting in and of itself. But that sort of stuck in his mind. And then there's a very, very elaborate relationship with a woman that he fell in love with. The woman ended up actually having what was it? A disease that you could have it for a long time and not die, but it was really clear to everybody that she was going to die. So he ended up marrying her sister. He was really encouraged to marry her sister, and he had a happy marriage with his sister, but there was a part of him that was probably still in love with the departed sister, And so that the Resurgam is really in many ways, I think, it's a very complicated work because it is a Christian work. Let me point that out, right? Nothing that I say in the article really is subversive in the sense that it doesn't take away the reading of it as a Christian piece, but it does delve into these areas of complexity. Most great artists are complex people, right? There's a lot going on there, which often comes out in the art, some of which they're not even aware of, which is what makes it really, really interesting. So some of those stormy moments in Resurgam where it's very melancholy, da 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 dee da da, that cornet solo, which Eric said that's Death Took My Love Away. He used to instruct the cornet players verbally on that. And you think, well, who was it that Death took away? Well, it was this young lady who he'd been in love with, and then you get the hellish sort of bit in the middle there where the trombones are blasting out Day of Judgment. You think, what on earth is going on here? But then at the end, you get that magical transformation, which it never fails, especially if people know the background. So it never, even Eric Ball himself, apparently, Harry Mortimer, who was conducting the Fairy Band at the time, there's an optional top D, da 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 da, in the cornet.
Yeah.
And he had all the cornets play the top D, so that he could just hold it on forever, And apparently everybody that was in the room that day realised that Fairy had won it. And Eric Ball apparently was sitting in the front row, just heaving, crying, but shoulders like really, really weeping, Aww. And I think his band came 6th that day. And the adjudicator's comments were, we believe the conductor of this band has failed to understand the composer's wishes.
On numbers for his band, and he was the composer.
Yeah, which is a nail in the coffin of adjudication, isn't it? I mean, it's like case exhibit A, right, against adjudication.
Yeah,
the composer who wrote it, he has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, that's a very risky comment to make.
Yeah,
especially knowing that the composer is probably conducting 3 of the bands.
The other story that pops to mind that I really love and that hopefully the listeners will enjoy was in 1967, actually going back to Jeffrey Brown and Black Dyke, because that legendary win that was the first time they'd actually used low pitch instruments. Brass bands used to be what used to be called high pitch. And there was this transformation that happened in the 60s, and it was Black Dyke's win on low pitch, the new, well, I call it low pitch, relative, not high pitch, right? Mm-hmm. The instruments that we all play on today. Black Dyke actually won that show on that piece, and the adjudicators were Eric Ball himself, because it was Journey into Freedom, Eric's piece that was being played, and Gilbert Vinter. One of the points I make is that in the 60s, Gilbert Vinter became the big star of the brass band world, sort of slightly eclipsing Eric himself. And in some ways, Journey into Freedom, I think, can be seen as not getting your own back at Gilbert Vinter, but sort of saying, I can do this too. It's like, okay, I may be, so the fact that almost all of Journey into Freedom is not Eric himself, it's only the very last bit. Where the big theme comes back at the end, sounds like the sun comes up, right? As the basses come up that scale, the sun comes out. Eric says all the music before that is kind of fake. It's all worldly music, which is a great way for him to write sort of Gilbert Vinter-like stuff. And halfway through the Black Tie performance, Gilbert Vinter, apparently with tears streaming down his face, leaned over and looked at Eric and said, "You've really written one for the ages," And I think that's such a super story, one great brass band composer to another,
Yeah, for sure. What are you talking about when you're talking about the high brass or the high sound and the low sound?
Yeah, for about 150 years, brass instruments were smaller generally than the ones that we have today. And the pitch was it wasn't quite a quantifiable thing, but it was higher. So if you listen to some of those recordings, which you can do on YouTube now, it's fantastic, right? Because you can listen to all of these performances. They all tended to be in what was then called high pitch. And then
like 445 or 446 or something like that?
Yeah, I can't remember the math on it, Tony, but yeah, some such, right? And then it was all brought into line with the pitch that everybody else was using. And that was around about 1967. I think Boosey's, especially because Boosey's at that time, today we're so spoiled with instrument choices, right? But back in the 60s, it was basically Boosey and Hawkes and Besson that ruled the show. So once they made the decision to change the pitch, it was then a question of all these brass bands, of course, they now have to spend a fortune replacing their entire... I don't know whether it'd be interesting for someone who's interested enough to go back and find out what happened here, because every brass band would essentially have had to have traded in their old instruments for the new ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
but it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that if you listen to those old recordings and you're like, why do those bands sound the way they do? That could be a reason for it that really I never had even thought of that before.
Yeah, they all used to have the old G trombones, with the trigger and everything, and the little trombones, they used to call them pea shooters. But then everything became, of course, large bore, and the rest is history, right? And then once lost the copyright, especially on the euphonium compensating, I can't remember what that was. It was like, but Yamaha used to have the valve right up here. I think maybe it was the same with the tubas, Tony. Was it the same with the Yamaha tubas? Yeah,
Yamaha had 4 upright,
That's right. And then until Boosey lost the copyright on it, or the patent, and then of course everything went down to the side of the horn, and you could then get all the way down legitimately to the bottom,
Yeah.
And Yamaha and everybody else started. Then the euphonium tuba world opened up in terms of companies now being able to make them.
Right.
Today we have this unbelievable range of choice. Repertoire as well. I mean, back in those days, it was like one cornet concerto, the Dennis Wright cornet concerto, no euphonium concerto. Actually, Jeffrey Brand commissioned the Holovitz and also the Ernest Tomlinson cornet concerto, the Holovitz euphonium. So it was only in the 70s that brass band instruments even started getting their own concertos. Something young players coming up today just take it for granted, right?
Yeah, that there were always solos to play.
Yeah, that's right. I think somebody recently put on Facebook, what's everybody's favorite euphonium concerto from the last 2 years? And I thought, wow, look at that. It's such a
2 years.
Yeah, right. It's like it's incredibly expanded field now.
Like there's more than one.
Amy championed the Bach, didn't you, Amy, for your doctorate?
I did what?
The Bach euphonium concerto. Was it the euphonium concerto or the variants or some such?
Oh yeah. I wrote about the Bach the Jan Bach euphonium concerto, and I actually I got to I emailed Jan about it, and I got he was fantastic. He emailed me back and he gave me charts. Yeah. And he gave me all the information I would ever need to write about. He gave me some of the analysis of his own concerto. I was like, yes, I will take this. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But he was a great help. We talked a whole bunch. And I remember reading other major papers on his euphonium concerto, and they totally disagreed with what Jan was telling me about his own piece. They were trying to figure out what was going on with his first movement, and I remember Jan sent me this chart, and it was the first theme chopped up into sections, and the second theme chopped up into sections, and he saw it totally as two different themes, just all the pieces.
There you go.
And so unless he told you that was what was going on, I doubt you would be able to see, what he was thinking figure out what he was thinking when he was writing it.
That's a great thing about talking to composers who are still alive, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm grateful I have that. Now that he's gone, I'd like to get that published, but I just have so many things I want to do and so little time. So at some point, especially that first movement and the last movement, the middle movement is kind of boring theoretically and like interesting wise, because it's just Mexican and Spanish music back and forth. The last movement was really interesting because it was in memory of his friend, and he had his Bach chorale, because there's always something Bach in Jan Bach stuff.
Right?
There needs to be.
Yeah. And then he had like the euphonium became like a pastor, and it became like a religious service.
Yeah, there you
near
go.
the end. So it was really
Was
cool.
Was this the concerto that was written for orchestra?
Yeah, it has orchestral.
Yeah,
it has orchestral
which it
accompaniment.
did.
There's I mean, euphonium and orchestra, there's like 60 euphonium and orchestra pieces. We just
but when this was written, there wasn't. There were very few.
Yeah.
When this was written, I think I remember that Neil Corwell did it with the North Carolina Symphony way back in the early years of it, like one of the earlier performances of it.
Yeah, that was one of the early ones, right back with the Horovitz.
Is there a recording of that? I don't have Jan only had the Brian Bowman recording, and there was another one that was too slow, and he like artificially sped it up, so it sounded like Nanny Goat the whole time. So somebody needs to record that. Somebody needs to record that piece. Somebody needs to play it, because it is a fantastic piece and I love it. And if anyone wants to supply a large ensemble for me, I will play it.
You just need an orchestra to back you up, right?
Well, there's orchestral. I think there's wind ensemble accompaniment, because I think Brian Bowman did it with wind ensemble. So there's, just supply someone out there, supply me with a large ensemble, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, I had an interesting experience when I was teaching you, Amy, because again, it's funny how Jeffrey Brand, who by the way just recently died in his 90s, so maybe by accident, by default, I hadn't planned this obviously coming into it, but here's Jeffrey again. I bumped into him at the British Open, and he asked me to do the premiere of the Gareth Wood euphonium concerto, but in its fourth movement version. David Childs, who it was written for, had premiered the three movement version, but there is actually this fourth movement, which is rather wonderful, kind of a waltz that sounds like a Danny Elfman track out of one of his movies. And that's another great euphonium concerto that deserves a bit more attention than it's had, so I'm putting in a little plug there for the Gareth Wood. No,
anyone out there, play that one too. We're just this is becoming a euphonium concerto plugging podcast.
It is. What about you, Tony? Have you got any favorite tuba concertos or any particular?
I don't play any euphonium concertos.
No, you do tuba, right?
Yeah, I'm a tuba player.
Tuba concertos.
It's funny. Yeah, with I've always had a special thing for the Vaughan Williams tuba concerto, because it was like the main concerto written for the tuba by a major composer.
Yeah.
I've actually for many years, I never really liked the John Williams concerto until recently. Sometimes you just kind of got to hear it in the right context. And I finally got to hear it live. If you hear it with piano, it does not work.
Yeah, there you
You
go.
have to hear it with the orchestration because, of course, John Williams is a master orchestrator. And it was the same thing with the Bruce Broughton Sonata as well. You listen to it with piano and it just doesn't, you're just like, wow, this is just missing something. And then you hear it with orchestra, either wind ensemble or orchestra, better with orchestra because Broughton and John Williams both know how to get the colors, all the colors. And the music is written like that. And you can actually hear the soundtrack type of composer that they are.
Yeah,
you hear them like that. So a lot of the tuba music, it depends on the context in which you hear it as to whether or not it really comes off across. The best performance I ever heard of the Vaughan Williams tuba concerto was by a bass trombonist.
Isn't that funny?
It works better as a bass trombone. Yeah, Matt Guilford with the National Symphony, and he played it. It was brilliant. I was like, wow, this piece was written for bass trombone. But the best performance I ever heard of the Strauss First Horn Concerto was with a tuba.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. It's funny that you're talking about Vaughan Williams because with COVID, I phoned up a bunch of friends around the world, and I've got a friend in Lancaster who we made a couple of small videos with the Lancaster Brass Band. And we worked on the variations for brass band, knowing that we'd bitten off something bigger than we could chew because that was a big project. We got everybody basically to record their parts. Some people
online.
No, a lot of people might think that, right? A lot of people, I think, look at the video and think it was a Zoom where I'm conducting and everybody's just playing. No. Everybody was recording their own parts, sent them over. George would mix them, and we'd be doing video conferences like this where we'd be listening to bar after bar, trying to get everything lined up, and just so. But Vaughan Williams' music, it never gets old.
No,
the quality is just so great.
The first time I ever heard the Vaughan Williams, the variation for brass band, it was actually on an Eastman Wind Ensemble recording called the Variations for Wind Band.
Yeah, there you go.
And Don Hunsberger, I think Don Hunsberger did the transcription for that.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, what a great piece. And I had no idea because I hadn't been introduced to brass bands in my life at that point. And then I was like, wow, I heard the brass band version. I was like, wow, somebody stole this wind band piece and made a brass band piece out of it. And turns out it's the other way around. And I did that with the Triangle Youth Brass Band at NABA in 2010.
Yeah.
That was, one of our pieces that we ripped out, and what a great piece. It was a lot of fun to play that one.
It's a great piece. It's a super piece. Yeah, there's a bit of a controversy about the interpretation aspect of it because I've done a couple of versions of it before, including one at NABA. They're actually on YouTube, but I've never been really happy about the speeds, even in a lot of the recordings. Something to, what it is? It's something to do with the fact that Vaughan Williams uses a slightly more, if you like, Brahmsian type of scoring. It's slightly denser. Yeah. The same thing with Henry V and also with the Prelude on Three Welsh Hymn Tunes. And what I began to realise, especially as I listen more and more to the symphonies and listen to some of the more recent interpretations, that if you don't take the tempo at the right speed, that orchestration can sound, what's the right word for it? Stodgy.
Yeah.
It can sound. Yeah, it can sound like it's being driven. Driven uncomfortably, a little bit like, if you will, a person who's more introverted, being forced to be someone that they're not, being asked to be something they're not. So for me, it was a real journey, and I figured out that by using the ninth variation in particular, which is so beautiful, don't know whether you guys can remember that, but the Adagio movement, which I think is one of the most beautiful pieces of music, let alone brass band music.
For sure.
And then, as it were, extrapolate out from there. Think of that as the heart of the piece, and then extrapolate out. It almost gives you then the tempo, and not just the tempo, but the tempo and the feel that's needed, which for me was a revelation. For a lot of people hearing it for the first time that know a lot of the old recordings, it'll be a real shock. It'll a bit like you with the John Williams. It'll take several listens to acclimatize. But I think once acclimatized, it's just wonderful. There's, what it is? There's so much poetry in it. That's I guess the point I want to make. There's so much poetry in it See, here's been always the big problem for me. Whenever that's been done in a concert with Henry V, even recently at one of the Festival of Brasses, right? Everybody comes away guiltily saying Henry V was better. You know, it's like they salute the flag with the variations. It's like, yes, it's a great piece, salute, salute, salute. But actually, the heart is with Henry V. But I really believe that if you get to the heart of the variations and get that poetry speaking, and sometimes that poetry is even note for note, not even phrase for phrase, right?
Yeah.
Henry V, beautiful piece it is. I'm a huge fan, right? But all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, we've got to make way here for the masterpiece, you know.
Yeah, I agree with 100%. I think that Henry V is the fun piece to play.
Yeah.
But the great piece, the masterwork, is the variations for sure.
Yeah. And probably a great test of any interpretation is have people sit down and listen to Henry V and then that interpretation and see if Henry V comes out the winner or not. Because done right, it shouldn't. But Henry V has got all of the right tactics to be the most popular piece. You know.
Yeah.
I'm being a bit. It's true. I think it's of the variations.
Yeah, for sure.
You've also written about Holst, haven't you?
Yeah, both of them, Imogen and Gustav, actually, because there's a wonderful piece by Imogen called "The Unfortunate Traveler."
Unfortunate Traveler.
Yeah, going to talk about that because that's going to be
the
coming up at NAVA
piece next year.
Oh, that's a fascinating piece. I mean, Imogen could be. I mean, her first book on Gustav is almost wickedly critical. I mean, she could be really almost venomous, actually, in a criticism of her dad's work. But if you listen to The Unfortunate Traveller, you can tell that she's been very knocked, as all of us, right? She's been really knocked to the side by the Moorside Suite. I mean, when Moorside Suite came out, there was nothing like that had been heard like it. Even that first movement, Scherzo, and the second movement, they're so chamber-like. They're so filigree and light and so unlike. You know, and Holst's imagination, his music. I'm still, even as I go on through my more mature years, my depth of appreciation and respect of Holst, and my desire to know more of his music only increases. And she obviously heard it, and she was a student at the Royal College of Music, and Vaughan Williams was not actually her teacher. I think Herbert Howells was actually her teacher, but she wrote the brass band piece as her finals.
Yeah.
And I love Imogen for this, because all of the people at the Royal College said, we can't possibly have a brass band. We can't do that. We can't have brass bands at the Royal College of Music. So I love Imogen because she stuck to her guns, but it's like, if you don't do something else, you're going to fail. So what she did is she did a string orchestra version of it. And the string orchestra version she conducted was the premiere of the piece. It wasn't even premiered by the brass band. Isn't that incredible, right?
Yeah.
And then in 1933, her dad, 1 year before he died, her dad had this very close relationship with a fellow who was involved in a charity who wanted Gustav to put on a concert, and he wanted with a brass band. And Carlisle St Stephen's was the big band of that day, the Corey band of that era was Carlisle St Stephen's. And so they were the ones to do it. And Gustav said to Imogen, "What about that brass band piece you wrote those years ago?" And she said, "No, it's long. It's been 3 years now, and I moved on to other things." He said, "No. I think she was a bit kind of like fed up with how it had been treated, not the piece itself, but how she'd been treated over the piece." So to Gustav's credit, he persuaded Imogen to rescue the piece. There were several times later on where she tried to destroy it, actually. She asked someone to destroy it for her, actually. But the story of the thing itself is incredible. I mean, The Unfortunate Traveller is the fortunate traveller, and it's come down to us today intact, right? So Gustav and Imogen love to have been at this concert, 1933. He conducted Moorside Suite. She conducted The Unfortunate Traveller. That was, I think, the premiere of the brass band version, 1933. And somebody had done an arrangement of another piece by Holst. What a great concert that would have been, right?
Yeah, really.
And there is a really interesting thing. Number one, although you could hear things in the Imogen piece where you can say, oh, that's obviously a connection with Moorside Suite, there's not in any sense, way, shape, nor form any impression that she's writing under the shadow of her father. It's a completely independent piece. And the way it expresses itself, even if it uses a couple of motives from the Moorside Suite or related to it, the way she expresses herself is emotionally so different. Because Imogen was very full of energy. She was a dancer, and she danced more than she walked. She was just a dancing person. And that really comes out in the piece. And the other slightly interesting thing is it's in 4 movements. And originally the Moorside Suite was going to be. Originally, the first movement of the Moorside as we know it was the 3rd movement. And it was a scherzo, and it was slower. It was going to be da 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 dee da dee da 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 dee da. Not how we know it today. Da 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 da. But Gustav banished what was going to be the original first movement, moved that movement to the front, sped it up. And that's now the three movement version that we know. Interesting thing is Imogen kept the 4 movement form, I think, even with a short introduction. So there's all kinds of very, very interesting connections, sibling and musical between. Go for it, Tone.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell that she studied the orchestrations of her father's, brass band work, because the orchestration is very similar.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Gustav is always more cut to the bone in all of his music. He's very rarely warm. He was probably, I think, a bit of a cold fish in some ways as a person, although, only for the most part, right? Whereas Imogen was this effulgent, very, very, very generous, giving person, So I think, as you said, to give them both credit, right? Because we all know how difficult it is for an orchestral person to learn brass band scoring. It's so tricky. But both Gustav and Imogen both scored their own pieces. And as I think you're beginning to realize, Tony, because you've worked with the piece, right? You could be conducting it.
The Imogen?
Yeah.
No. We just looked it over as we were selecting it for the competition, but we haven't played it. I've done Moorside Suite.
Yeah. Have you heard the Imogen?
Yeah. Well, there was a performance at Royal Northern, what was the Brass Festival? Wasn't there a performance at the Brass Festival last year?
Yeah.
Somebody did it. Grimthorpe did it or something. Brighouse, yeah. And there's another recording of it out there as well that we listen to a lot. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I mean it's a very delightful piece. I think everyone's going to love playing it.
Oh, it's great.
It's a piece of brass band history that needs to be brought out. For the fact, I mean it's Imogen Holst, whose father was Gustav Holst, who's one of the greatest composers of all time.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first female to write a brass band piece and to conduct a brass band, that at least that most people know about. So it's historically significant, and it's such a delightful piece. It is a no-brainer really to pick.
I mean, one of the great things I think since the Me Too movement and all of the quite rightly, the rebalancing of many things, right? There's been a focus on this kind of music. So Imogen's piece is now, oh wow, how could we possibly have missed this, right? Thea Musgrave's Variations, which has always been around, but again, I think people are beginning to realize, wow, this is really. There's a piece by Phyllis Tate called Illustrations, which is Jeffrey Brand again championed that. He recorded it with Brighouse on the radio and Black Dyke. He was a big champion of women composers, actually, Jeffrey. Then there's 3 pieces by Helen Perkin, Carnival, Sovereign Heritage.
Carnival, yeah.
And then I found this piece by this Irish composer, Joan Trimble. I doubt you guys have even heard of her. I hadn't before I found this. She and her sister were a world-traveling piano duo. They played duets, for 2 pianos, and that was their act. But she was also a composer, and she wrote this piece called Island Till the End of Time. I think it was in 1940. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the Irish pronunciation of it. But I've never heard it. I don't have a score of it. And I put it in, I put it recently in this list of brass band pieces that are essential. So it's a wonderful thing that gradually I think these female composers who have written for brass band, who should all along have been accepted just as any other composer, are finally beginning to come out and be shown and heard, which I think is fabulous. You know, it's incredible for me to think. Incredible for me to think. There's no commercial recording of the Phyllis Tate. There's no commercial recording of two of the Helen Perkin pieces. There's no commercial recording, I don't think, unless Corey did one years ago, of The Unfortunate Traveller. Maybe that was done a few years ago. But it's incredible for me to think that this music just is unknown for the most part, you know?
Yeah. If we go back even further, I just read an article about how some of Bach's writings might have been his, what is it, second wife, might have contributed some stuff that was published under his name. And of course we know that a few of Mozart's pieces a few of the pieces that were published as being by Mozart were actually by his sister. And we're finding that, you know, these women who were discouraged from composing.
Mm-hmm.
And they found a way, but they're just erased.
It was the same with Mahler's wife, Alma, too. She was a composer, and she used to store hers away in a wall. There was a hole in the wall where she would hide it so that he wouldn't discover it. And, you know, who knows what? It's scary to think of it. But yeah, Bach and Mendelssohn, same thing with Fanny, right? His sister with Mozart, like you said, amazing. Yeah, and this is all beginning to now become known.
Yeah, imagine the amount of work that has been suppressed.
Wow.
You know, over the years that could have been here for us.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. No, it's really true. It's really true. It's funny. There's even some old brass band pieces. A piece called Blackfriars by Edric Kundal. It's actually one of Edward Grigson's favorite pieces.
Yeah.
But there was a particular person who was very powerful in the brass band world at that time. And if you got on the wrong side of him, it was bad news. And somehow or another, Edric Kundal managed to do that. So Blackfriars was kind of blacklisted, you know.
Yeah.
That's a piece. It's a great piece. And bands should be recording it. I don't think it's been recorded for 20, 30 years.
Yeah. But that was like a major test piece in the 30s.
Yeah.
Like didn't Foden's like make their big mark with that?
Things. Yeah. Yeah, it was one of the biggies back in the day, but they kind of vanish unless you advocate for it, right? It's even like on the show, right? Even the fact that Amy's been talking about the Bach euphony music, a lot of people who might have heard her speaking about that go, "Oh, let me go get that now," right? Or the Holovich euphony. The very fact that we're talking about it causes people, and I've got this theory that it doesn't matter how brilliant you are, unless you advocate for something, it's going to disappear. Even if it's brilliant and wonderful. Look at Bach's St. Matthew Passion. Completely disappeared until it was discovered in the library by Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
You know? And everybody thought Liszt was like Telemann. Bach was like Telemann. You think, you know, it's incredible stuff.
Yeah, well, if only the New World BrassCast had that kind of influence.
Yeah, right.
Our 24 listeners, somebody's going to play the Jan Bach now.
These are the early days, though, Tony. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I remember the days when the European Brass Band Championship used to be two European brass bands coming to the Albert Hall to be beaten by Black Dyke. Now the European Brass Band Championship is all over the world, you know, and the Europeans, if the Brits win it, it's like a good year, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You got to start somewhere, right?
Today, right?
Yeah.
It's like 60 brass bands in Japan. Who would have believed that at one time? So, you know, hope for the brass podcast yet.
Speaking of Japan, the next International Women's Brass Conference is officially in Japan.
Hey!
I got my questionnaire to see if I was interested. If I was asked if I would play in Athena, and I was like, yes.
Hey, get them playing this music, Amy. Advocate for these pieces.
We
Of
just got a
course.
great big list here of all these pieces that you guys should look at for this.
Yeah, there you go. It's great. Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, Athena's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, wow.
It's getting bigger and bigger, and I think Athena is looking at the potential for a UK tour as well.
Fantastic.
So I got the questionnaire for both of those about availability and whether I'd want to do it. And I was like, wow, that was an email. Do you want to go to the UK? Do you want to go to Japan? Yes.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Count me in. I'm
Count
there.
me in. Exactly.
And I'll be playing the premiere of the brass band version of the Jan Bach Concerto.
That would be awesome. That would be great. And then and something else that I wanted to kind of add into this conversation that we were having, we were talking about advocating for these great pieces that were written in the past that haven't been heard, and finding some of those female composers who people just might not know about. NABA is commissioning a first section test piece with Lucy Pankhurst for 2025, and I am so excited.
That's great.
Just wanted to mention that.
It's wonderful. Yeah, that's great.
That's great. Yeah, we're very excited about that. That's going to be a great project for us, and we can't wait to see what Lucy comes up with for it.
She mentioned that I think she was asked to write a test piece for, like, what was it, for one of the regionals or something in the UK, and she turned it down a few years ago because she didn't have the right ideas. She didn't know what she wanted to do. She didn't kind of have her thoughts like all together on what she wanted to do with it. And when I spoke with her last, she was like, it's all like coming together, and I have my ideas, and things are happening. So
good.
That's kind of fun.
That's going to be great.
Yeah, we're super excited for that. 2025 can't get here soon enough, can it? Yeah. Helen
Grime in the UK is a woman that we should definitely try and. Oh, there's so many people though, isn't there? You know, get to write for brass bands. I mean, Thomas Adair's is somebody that we should get to write. You know, my only consolation is that in a few years' time, we'll be able to say to artificial intelligence, can you write us, please, a brass band piece in the style of Benjamin Britten?
Yeah.
You know,
it's not far away.
Have you guys heard the Beatles songs that AI has been developing?
No.
Sound like the Beatles in the mid 1960s.
Oh, that's going to be weird. That's going to be so weird.
Yeah, so we'll be able to say to artificial intelligence, write a brass band test piece as Beethoven would have in 1820, and it will. Yeah. And it's going to be good.
We have to remember that Stephen Hawking's big warning to the world is like, what's going to be the downfall of civilization is when artificial intelligence can do this stuff.
I think it's going to redraw the map in a big way, but I'm an optimist. You know, I think every era of great breakthrough, you think of the book, you know, when the printing press, and you think of the internet, you know, there's bad stuff in books and there's bad stuff on the internet, right? And there's going to be bad stuff with AI. And because we've all watched the horror movies, we've all seen Terminator and all of that jazz, right? So we're all primed to sort of do the knee-jerk thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that the warnings have to be heeded, right? They're obviously, I think you're right, Tony, there definitely needs to be checks and balances. But also I share Stanley Kubrick's point of view, which is the more intelligence, the better. You know, it's like, if anything, we need more, not less in this world, right?
Well, unfortunately, we've got too much of the less and not enough of the more.
I think my thought, I heard someone say, with this AI, we're doing so much with art and AI. I would rather have the AI do the work for me so that we all have the extra time in our lives to create more work that's human created.
For art, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, because I mean, obviously, what AI is able to do, and I suspect it will be stupendous. It will never be human. Actually, talking about Stanley Kubrick, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and even AI, the movie that was
Yeah.
made by Steven Spielberg, right? This is one of the things that gives me great confidence. Is Stanley was an atheist, one of my favorite atheists. I'm a Christian, but he's one of my favorite atheists, right? And he was a chess player. And if anyone would have thought, let's take the worst case scenario, if anybody would have thought that, well, okay, if AI becomes, it doesn't breathe, it doesn't pollute, it doesn't hate, it doesn't wear out, it doesn't pollute the planet. So why don't we just have AI be created, and then every human being takes cyanide, so that the whole Earth can be run by AI beautifully with no problems? Stanley Kubrick said, no, actually, that isn't what's going to work. He actually had a great confidence in humanity, not because he was human himself, because his kind of brain would have worked that if AI was the answer, he would have said AI is the answer, right?
Yeah.
But it all comes down to love with Stanley's, with the artificial intelligence. It's like if something loves you, but it's been programmed to, could that ever be real love? In the same way, you might say we have a Beethoven brass band piece and it really sounds like Beethoven, but it isn't. In the final analysis, it is a kind of a con, a good one.
Yes.
A con, right?
Yes. But like I'm still trying to wrap my head around how would he orchestrate a brass band piece when it's something that he never would have even imagined could have been possible. Like he didn't even have these instruments. Like when Beethoven wrote, the tuba didn't even exist.
That's right.
So how is he going to possibly write or orchestrate for an instrument that didn't even exist when he was alive?
Yeah,
so that's so it's like it would be a great con. You're exactly right. It would be a con.
I mean, AI will take care of that. I mean, Paul McCartney right now is listening to himself singing in Beatles songs from 1964 that he never sang.
That's so weird.
Yeah, and in fact, the Beatles, I think actually Paul McCartney has just finished a song with John Lennon that the AI, I mean, a bona fide, Paul McCartney endorsed song is about to come out with the Beatles with Paul, with John rather.
Wow,
just amazing.
Wow.
I think that Beethoven would be fantastic at orchestrating brass instruments. I think that the heaviness of some of the heaviness of the texture, I think if he had the full complement of modern brass instruments, I think that he would like use that color to great effect. My brain is going thinking about it.
Mozart. Imagine what Mozart, the genius that Mozart had, what he would have done if he had that full complement of a modern symphony orchestra.
But I don't think that he would have. I don't think that Mozart would have used it nearly. And I think that Beethoven would be one that would add in. That would use the heaviness and the heft of the low brass, especially. I could see Beethoven doing that.
Here's an interesting one for you, Tony, on that, because Malcolm Sargent, the British conductor, he loved brass bands. He made an arrangement of the Fantasia by Mozart. I can't remember what it was for. It was for glass. It was for something like glass organ originally. But when Eric Ball heard it, he said that could have been by Mozart. He said that is so good. The scoring of it, the sound of it, the weight of it, the proportion of it. And I've just been listening to it recently again, actually, and it's a really terrific arrangement. But even working on my variations for brass band, where I could phone George and I could say, George, could you take the solo cornet part? Could you just make a slight crescendo at the very end of this note? Could you just slightly shave this little bit of articulation off the end of this? Imagine that you could say to artificial intelligence, okay, I want to hear Spirity by Thomas Doss, right? Played by the Black Dyke Band in the 1960s, conducted by Jeffrey Brand. So I want Jim Shepard on cornet. I want to hear John Clough on the euphonium part, Frank Berry on the trombone. And AI says, sure. And AI will just give you Spirity, played by Black Dyke Mills, conducted by Jeffrey Brand in 1960, whatever year it's been fed the recordings of, so that it can hear all of those instruments and then reproduce. I think that's an astounding thing. I mean, I don't feel anything but positive about that, because I think just that in itself is just so unbelievably amazing. You know what I mean? And even some of these people that died really young, you could say to artificial intelligence, well, try and imagine what they would have written 5 years after they died.
Yeah.
And it's got all the stuff inside of there. You think, wow, there's just such incredible potential, you know?
Yeah.
Wow. It's a different, I know, because for our generation, it's a completely different type of jump, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, I mean, if you watch that thing I did with the Variations for Brass Band with all those players, you think, well, Steve, I was conducting, singing to myself. There was no recording playing. It's me going, duh. I could have conducted that piece from memory, right? But I couldn't without a band in front of me. When I did the seventh suite, I did it from memory because I knew it with the band.
Yeah.
This I had to have the score because I just sang it, and then each of these players recorded their part. We layered it, textured it, shaped it, and all of a sudden you think to yourself, well, in theory, anyone could do this.
Yeah.
So Tony, what's your favorite Mahler symphony or orchestral piece?
Well, Mahler symphony is probably 3.
So let's say in 10 years' time, you sit down with your computer and say, okay, computer, I want to give you my interpretation of Mahler 3 today. You're going to record it and we're going to put it on YouTube. And you're going to say, no, just slow that bar down, go back, just slow that bar down a bit. Can you just bring the bass, can you bring the tuba out a wee bit more here?
Yeah, right.
You're going to be able to do that. And what will happen is it'll be the Berlin Philharmonic, conducted by Tony.
Yeah.
Mahler's Third Symphony. It's going to be, that's going to happen. And all of the world's conductors who have relied on sometimes things other than their musical ability to get to where they got.
Yeah.
Are going to confront geniuses who don't have those abilities, but have great musical abilities, who will be able to put out their alternate take.
Yeah.
Imagine that. I mean, it's really mind-blowing to think of it, right? But it's going to happen. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, that's quite true. That's the only way I'm gonna get to conduct the Black Dyke Band too.
That's it. Your favorite brass band piece with the Black Dyke Band in whatever year you want.
From 1982, yeah.
So, do you remember in the beginning? We're going to start to wrap up here, but do you remember in the beginning where I described what lessons with Steve were like?
Did you get to play it all?
We played, but it was kind of like, it was kind of checking in on what was going on. And then we'd talk about, this and that and how this relates to that. And I think that was incredibly, incredibly useful. But I just wanted to say that, like, now everyone who listens to the podcast just can understand how I said Steve is just like a wealth of information, and you just like let him loose, and he's going to talk about fascinating things. You're going to learn new things, and it's awesome.
You have to forgive me, guys. I'm an educator. What can I say?
You were such a natural educator. We just, every conversation I have with you, I feel like I'm going to go out and just, because I'm just like, I'm inspired to go read about, I should have been writing down all the different things that I was going to look up after our conversation. I'll have to listen to it again and write down, take notes.
Yeah,
but
we should probably do like a regular series, like a 9-part series with Stephen Arthur Allen.
Yeah, well, it'd be great if you can stand it.
Well, we do have something else planned with him in the future, but you're just gonna have to trust us on that. And we'll leave it at that, but it's upcoming. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining us and sharing some of your vast knowledge with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Delightful to see you both. It's been a long time, Tony. And it's been a good amount of time.